Also, been watching Adolescence
Oh,
on
is it
Netflix.
good? Is it good?
I had heard nothing but fantastic things. Super cool. There's 4 episodes.
Yeah.
They're an hour long. They are all shot and filmed in one shot. Every single episode
Ooh.
is one continuous shot, which is just chef's kiss. I'm halfway through the 3rd episode, so I've got a little bit and then a whole other
Yep.
episode. But holy shit, it's intense.
I just saw the trailer for it yesterday.
It's definitely intense, and I wouldn't say you're gonna enjoy it
Yes.
because it's a very heavy topic, but holy shit, is it good. And it's something, while I say, like, you're not gonna enjoy it, but I think it's something everyone should watch
Okay.
because it just speaks to, like, what's going on with kids these days
like
and, like,
that, yeah.
violence and all that stuff, but definitely check it out. Like, fucking not sponsored or anything, guys. I'm just watching it.
No, we're totally
And
sponsored by Netflix.
yeah,
that's
I
what you're talking
wish,
about.
I wish, but it's the first, like, show I've just, like, watched of my own volition in a really long
Yeah.
time. I'm just watching it while I'm working on design stuff and whatnot, but yeah, holy cow, it's
I'll
good.
have to watch that.
Yeah, definitely as good as everyone's saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
I found out something kind of cool.
Oh, do tell.
So I was talking to someone about Ratathor at
Okay,
work yesterday,
yes.
and I was talking about, like, for my uranium glass display, how badly I just want, like, a little bottle because I
Yes,
think it
that
would
would
just
be
be really
super
appropriate.
cool, yes.
And so we were Googling Ratathor,
Mhm.
and if you look up Ratathor and you go to images, our Eben Byers episode is, like, right there.
Whoa, I guess we did something right with the SEO on that
Yeah,
one
I
or
know, I was like,
something.
"Dang,
That's
okay." I'm
super
like, "Hey,
cool.
that's me."
We're famous. Not really,
Yeah.
but hey, first page of Google isn't
I
too
was
shabby.
pretty excited about it,
I did see something the other day. Actually, it was a TikTok video on why cubic zirconia is better than diamonds
Mhm.
because it's cheaper and it looks exactly the same. But also, cubic zirconia crystals, when found naturally,
Mhm.
often contain uranium.
I like it.
Yeah, me too. That's why they're just cooler than diamonds.
I like it.
Anywho, hello everyone. I'm Charlotte.
And I'm Dina. Welcome to the Grim Curriculum.
We are on to part 2 of our Ed Gein series.
Yay!
Yay! And Dina has just informed me there's gonna be a part 3.
Yes. I am halfway through Deviant and he's just gotten caught. So there is much, much more.
We are catching up.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about what makes Ed different from some of the other people that we've covered because he is very different.
Mhm.
At the end of the day, most of our subjects, they have a lot in common when it comes to the fact that a lot of these people are obviously monsters. The thing that I have to remind myself about him, especially reading Deviant, is how little everyone around him saw this coming.
Oh, yes, everyone says, A, they didn't expect it because he was so small,
Mhm.
and B, they trusted him. He was pretty well, I don't know if respected is the right word, but everyone thought he was a polite man, maybe a little odd, but certainly not capable of the things he was capable of.
Yeah, like, respect, definitely, I wouldn't use that word,
No.
but he was tolerated
Yes,
in a
yes.
Midwestern friendly way.
Exactly. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Especially for the time.
Yes.
Something that we wanted to stress last week was just how unassuming Ed was. And once again, he was out there babysitting for many of the people in Plainfield. And I said this last week, even in non-hindsight, even not knowing what we
Mhm.
know now, just knowing what these folks knew about Ed, I don't know that I would be asking him to watch my kids.
I just really hope they cover that in the Monster series. I wanna see him
Yes.
babysitting and doing magic tricks.
I just wanna see it in a setting where my brain can maybe find it a bit more relatable.
Yeah, no, you won't.
Probably not.
I think if anything, you're gonna see it and be like, "Why?"
Yeah, you're probably right.
He was considered by most to be relatively friendly, polite, and above all, a bit of a dullard.
But today we are really going to see the tide start to turn.
We last left off with the somewhat relieving loss of his father, George, the suspicious death of his brother, and most importantly to Ed, the passing of his beloved mother, Augusta.
According to the citizens of Plainfield, Ed's outward behavior at this time hadn't changed.
Or, at least it hadn't changed yet.
Ed was by no means a man who took his appearance seriously, but it was easy to see that he was starting to look a little different. His hair was unkempt, and the stubble on his face was left to grow longer than it usually had.
There was also the matter of the smell. Harold Schechter goes into detail about this, saying that those around him definitely noticed that he was far more odorous than he had ever been before. That doesn't really come as a shock considering the conditions he was now living in.
I can handle a lot of stuff,
Mhm.
but one thing that puts me over the edge every time that has me gagging is a smell.
Mhm.
You know, I can handle garbage, whatever, but the second that smell hits me, I'm
Yeah.
like, "Oh, hell
Or
no."
just those people that just like it's terrible to say, but they smell like they're rotting from the inside out.
Well, I think you become nose blind to yourself.
Yeah.
There's folks with perfume that need to knock it off too. The once well maintained Gein farm had fallen into disarray. It seemed as if Ed had just given up on it altogether. The front yard was overgrown with weeds, and he had sold the rest of the livestock in order to pay for Augusta's poorly attended funeral.
He didn't need much to support himself as his expenses were quite low, so he made what little money he needed by leasing a few acres of land to neighboring farmers and working as a handyman slash babysitter.
The farmers' wives seemed to feel bad for him. Despite the fact that he was a full grown man, they felt as if he didn't have anyone to take care of him, so they would sometimes go out of their way to show him a little extra kindness.
During the holidays, many of them were said to always have an extra batch of cookies made for him, and he seemed to appreciate their efforts even though he could barely look them in the eye to say thank you.
Now, like in again, hindsight, I'm like, It's probably because he knew what he was doing behind the scenes. And also, I mean, he was pretty shy,
Mhm.
but, and, mommy issues galore.
Mhm.
But they just thought he was shy. And it's like, oh no, he's so much more than that.
Yeah, and you have to remember he spent his whole life hearing from Augusta how evil women are. And so now they're baking him cookies and he's like, I don't understand what's
I'm
happening.
sure, if anything, he's very
Oh,
confused.
yes.
The men, on the other hand, were not so sympathetic. They judged him for how sensitive he was, and because of this, he was often the target of pranks. On one occasion, they took a half bottle of beer and filled it with brandy. They offered it to Ed, who swigged the whole thing without a thought. They then laughed at him as he almost immediately passed out from the alcohol.
Another time, they planted a smoke bomb under the hood of his truck.
That again, I do feel sorry for him. Like, they're making fun
Mhm.
of someone who maybe is not altogether
Yeah,
there.
absolutely. And he's just suffered the greatest loss of his life.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, most people, well, all people except for Ed, I think, did not look kindly upon Augusta.
Mhm.
But to put it in perspective, yeah, this man he was devastated by this.
Yeah.
And he's really done nothing wrong as far as we know at
Yeah.
this point.
Well, as far as they know, especially.
Exactly.
To these people, these pranks must have seemed like a fun way to pass the time and get a few laughs in at the town weirdo. But I think for Ed, I'm totally speculating here, but I really do believe this. All of this kind of just reaffirmed everything that Augusta had told
Mhm.
him about the cruelty of the world. Because now she's gone,
Yes.
she can't protect him, and the men are being mean to him.
It's prophecy coming true for
Yeah.
him. By the 1950s, Ed had almost completely retreated from the rest of the town and spent most of his time in the decaying Gein house. He would enjoy his favorite meal, which was beans directly from the can, eaten with whatever dirty utensils he could find. The floor was crowded with debris, food scraps, and rodent droppings. So much so that he would often trip over things even in the daytime. Not a healthy environment for him to be in.
No. For fun, he continued to read his adventure magazines and found a fascination with the crimes committed during World War II by the Nazis. He took a particular liking to Ilse Kush. Is it
Mhm.
Kush?
Well, it's pronounced a lot of different ways. I've heard cook, kush, kosh, cock.
I'm gonna say Kush. He took a particular liking to Ilse Kush, a woman nicknamed the Bitch of Buchenwald.
Honestly, we could do a whole episode on her because she is a real person,
Yes.
and holy shit.
Mm-hmm.
If this is who Ed is getting his inspiration from, and he certainly was, things were not boding well.
We haven't covered really World War II crimes, but that is
No,
I would love to cover
I
that
do
more.
have a solid list because boy
Mm-hmm.
howdy, there were many.
After the war, she was accused of having selected tattooed prisoners to be killed so she could have items like lampshades and book bindings made from their skin.
Exactly.
I mean, it tracks.
Yeah, I believe it was also her or someone very similar in the concentration camps too, who would have, like, dogs set upon pregnant women
Yep.
and just the most atrocious crimes you can
Mhm.
imagine. One of Ed's other favorite pastimes was looking through the obituaries and saving the ones of women who had recently passed away.
More than anything, he spent a lot of time thinking about his mother and how much he missed her. Ed would lay in bed and listen for her voice, and he would later say that on more than one occasion, he heard her speaking to him and telling him to be a good boy. He boarded off her room and kept it exactly as she had left it.
As for the rest of Plainfield, they weren't exactly in the best place either. From the 1940s to the 1950s, there was a string of unsolved disappearances. An 8-year-old girl named Georgia Weckler was among the first. She was given a ride home by a neighbor who dropped her off at her family's mailbox about a kilometer away from her house.
He watched her take some mail out and wave goodbye to him. She was never seen again. Another girl was Evelyn Hartley, who was last seen babysitting at a neighbor's house. Her belongings were left behind. It was concluded that at some point she was forced into a car. Neighbors had reported hearing a scream, but they assumed it was the sound of children playing.
A white pair of underwear and a bra were discovered that were matched to her, but like Georgia, her body was never found.
On November 1st, 1952, 43-year-old Victor Travis and an acquaintance of his went off to hunt deer. They too were never seen again. A local paper wrote,
It is a wild country that could hide violence for years and perhaps never give up its secret. Trust in the papers again to be all
mm-hmm.
poetic about a horrific situation.
And they could not have been more right, especially with what they would find out a few years later.
100%.
And then came the disappearance of Mary Hogan. Mary was a staple in the community who ran a popular tavern where Ed was a regular. It's important to note that due to his father's alcoholism, Ed was not much of a drinker. Instead, he came to the tavern because he had developed a strange obsession with Mary.
She was middle aged and of German descent. On the outside, she was very similar to Augusta, which is probably what drew Ed to her. Outwardly, she could not have been more different. Mary was twice divorced and was known for her foul mouth and love of alcohol. There were also rumors that she had worked as a madame in Chicago, where she had links with the mob. What a
She sounds
badass.
kind of fun,
Honestly, she sounds cool as hell.
right? He was both attracted to her and repulsed by her ways. This confused him even more because Mary was, by all accounts, incredibly kind to Ed.
If Augusta had still been alive, this would have been exactly the kind of woman she would tell him, and I would say keep him away from.
Hmm. On December 8th, 1954, Mary was closing up their tavern when Ed walked in holding his gun. It's likely that she greeted him without any sense of knowing what was going to happen. He raised his weapon and fired, killing her instantly.
He then loaded her body into his truck and took her to the Gein house. Later, he would admit to stringing her up in the kitchen and cutting her up. He saved parts of her that he wanted to keep and burnt the rest.
A farmer by the name of Seymour Lester was the one who reported her missing. He had walked into the tavern and was shocked to see the usually busy place was silent. Seymour then noticed the large pool of blood on the floor and notified the police. When they arrived, they saw a 32 caliber cartridge and concluded based on the crime scene that her body had been dragged out of the building.
They searched the tavern for fingerprints and conducted a farm to farm check with no results. The truth about Mary Hogan would not be known for years.
Among those who occasionally employed Ed was a farmer named, and this is one of the stranger names I've heard, Elmo Ueck?
I believe it's Dutch and that
Ueck?
the pronunciation could be anything.
Ueeck.
Ueck?
Ueck.
Ueck?
Let's call him Ueck.
Sure. Elmo.
Elmo. Like many of Ed's acquaintances, he would often pester him about women. And one day, shortly after the disappearance of Mary, the two were chatting, and Elmo told Ed,
Eddie, if you spend more time courting Mary, she'd be cooking for you instead of missing.
Ed then rolled his eyes, wiggled his nose, smiled, and slyly said,
Oh, she's not missing. She's down at the house now. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying people asked him and
mm-hmm.
he told them the truth, but because they had no way of realizing he was
Yeah,
capable of what he was capable of. They were just like, "Ha ha, you're so funny, Ed.
you're so weird.
What a
And
guy."
he's gonna do this again and again.
Mhm.
Elmo would later say that a comment like this coming from anyone else would have struck him as deeply suspicious, but Ed was always saying weird things, so he didn't think much of it. Neither did the other men when Ed said things like,
"She's at the farm now.
and
I went and got her in my pickup truck and took her home."
he's a very honest man.
And they just had no clue.
The men would simply chuckle at his comments or shake their heads at what they considered to be his feeble attempts at humor.
It was around that time when a group of local youngsters began talking about something strange that Ed had shown them, a series of shrunken heads. One of them was someone Ed considered to be among one of his best friends, a young boy by the name of Bobby Hill, whose family owned a local store. Bobby
Bobby
Hill.
Hill.
10 out of 10 name. Amazing.
Bobby and Ed had spent a fair bit of time together. They would hunt rabbits and attend the local high school's baseball games.
I hate this because it actually does sound like an episode of King of the Hill. Bobby makes friends with a serial
I
killer.
would watch the shit out of that.
I and then like Dale Gribble knowing about it the whole time because he's
Yeah.
the conspiracy theorist and no one's
No
listening.
one's believing him.
Oh my god, truth is stranger than fiction, folks.
Bobby was one of the few people that Ed had allowed into his house, and he stated that Ed had shown him a series of shrunken heads along with larger ones that seemed to be made out of leather.
When he I now I'm just picturing Bobby Hill from King of the Hill. I can't
That's
help
literally
myself.
all I could picture this whole time, and Bobby Hill's a really big part of this story, and that's all I know. It's a very serious, this is very somber,
Oh,
this is terrible, but all I see is Bobby Hill.
okay. Well, if nothing else, it's a little bit of comedic relief for the absolute gruesome horror show this
Mhm.
is. Oh my goodness. When he asked him where he could have ever found something so morbid, Ed told him that they were genuine South Sea shrunken heads that his cousin had sent him from the Philippines when he was fighting there in the war.
As word spread, the townsfolk clearly thought that this was strange, but once again, this was not something that really caused any suspicion. In fact, it was exactly the kind of thing that they would expect weird old Ed to have.
By some notions, it seemed as if Ed had wanted things to change for him. He approached some neighbors, a husband and a wife, and proposed that they switched houses. When they came to see his home, they were overall disgusted by the state of it.
The husband, much to his wife's dismay, pointed to a room and as a joke asked Ed if that was where he kept his shrunken heads. Ed laughed and simply said,
Oh no, they're in the other room. Again, he's telling them.
on November 16th, 1957, Plainfield was fairly deserted. Hunting season had just begun and the majority of the men were off looking for deer. Ed was one of the few men who would not be out amongst them.
He had finished breakfast and got ready to head into town. He had run a few errands and then made his way down to Warden's hardware store. It was run by 58-year-old widow Bernice Warden.
There are a lot of female business owners in this community.
Hell yeah.
In the 50s,
I'm here for it.
right?
Absolutely.
Bernice was regarded as a bit of a snippy woman with a sharp tongue. She was a devout Methodist and proud grandmother. She ran the store with her son Frank, who on that day, like the other men, was out hunting.
Frank would later remember that the day prior, he had told Ed that he wouldn't be at the store for that exact reason.
Bernice wouldn't have been surprised to see Ed walk in. He had been spending more and more time at the store, and on one occasion, even invited her to go roller skating with him, all while donning his strange little grin. Bernice was not impressed.
Go figure. He inquired about the price of antifreeze and agreed to purchase some. She filled up his container and wrote a sales receipt for him. He then walked out the door. Moments later, he reappeared and told her that he was thinking of trading in his gun. She grabbed one off the wall and allowed him to examine it.
Bernice then moved over to the store window as Ed stood behind her. Little did she know that he had pulled out a 22 shell from his pocket and loaded the gun. Her last words were,
I see Bud has a new car. I do not like Chevrolets.
I had to include that.
Oh, what? I mean, it's so
It
unassuming.
is,
It does make me a little more glad's not the right word, but it relieves me a little bit to know that she didn't see it coming,
right?
that it was quick.
I get what you're saying.
Ugh. Shortly after, Uick was driving down the road when he spotted Ed's truck barreling down the road in his direction. This surprised him because more often than not, Ed drove painfully slow. Elmo had just killed a deer that happened to be on Ed's property and he felt guilty. He wanted to stop and explain himself. Ed didn't stop when he saw him like he normally would. Instead, he just sped past with a friendly wave.
A few hours later, Bobby Hill, along with his sister Darlene, paid Ed a visit to ask them for help with their car. When they arrived, he told them that he needed to go inside and wash up because his hands were covered in blood.
Bobby and Darlene didn't think much of it and assumed he had just been dressing a deer. In hindsight, they found it strange because Ed had always had an aversion to blood, sometimes to the point of fainting.
Ed arrived at their home and fixed up their car. Their mother, Irene, invited him to stay for supper. He accepted and thoroughly enjoyed the hearty meal. After all, he had worked up quite the appetite.
Later on, Bernice's son, Frank Warden, had heard that his mother had closed up the store early. He immediately found this strange and went over to investigate. The cash register was missing, and the floor was covered in blood.
Frank had been a deputy sheriff, and while he was alarmed, he didn't panic. Instead, he called Sheriff Art Shuley in Watoma. Sheriff Shuley phoned his chief deputy, Arnie Fritz, and together they made their way to Plainfield.
By the time they arrived, Frank had had a chance to go through the scene in more detail. As soon as he saw the men, he blurted out,
He's done something to her.
when Arnie Fritz asked him who he meant, he replied,
Eddie Gein.
he elaborated that Ed had been hanging around the store a lot and was asking his mother to go roller skating with him and inviting her to the movies. He then remembered that Ed had been by the day before and had told him that he would be off hunting all day with Bernice alone in the store.
He then showed them something he discovered while he was waiting for them to arrive. It was a sales receipt for antifreeze written by his mother. The name on the receipt, Ed Gein.
This confirmed to them that Ed was the last known person to see Bernice. They decided that he needed to be located immediately. Arnie Fritz put out a call for help, and before long, lawmen throughout the region had arrived to offer their assistance. By 7 p.m., the streets outside of the store were filled with squad cars.
The community was alarmed to say the least. Another woman had been taken from under their noses with no explanation. This time was different, though. There was a name attached to the kidnapper.
Meanwhile, Ed was still enjoying himself at the Hill House. He was playing with the younger children when Jim Vroman, Irene's son in law, ran in and began talking about the disappearance of Bernice Warden.
Ed listened and allowed him to finish talking and simply said,
Must have been someone pretty cold blooded.
Again.
Again, you guys.
Irene looked at him and remembered that just a few years prior, Ed had been dining at their home when they heard the news of Mary Hogan's disappearance. So she asked Ed,
Ed, how come every time someone gets banged on the head and hauled away, you're always around?
Ed gave his little grin and just shrugged.
Crikey.
Honestly, knowing what we know now,
Wild.
incredibly creepy.
Absolutely, like goosebumps, like my skin is crawling creepy.
And the term ghoul gets thrown around, and that's really what he was. He was a scary little ghoul, and he's just sitting there like, I don't know.
Oh, I guess must have been someone cold blooded. Bobby asked Ed to take him down to the store to see what all the commotion was about, and Ed happily obliged. So they got ready to go. Irene got herself ready to relieve her husband from his duties at their store.
Shortly after she arrived, Officer Dan Chase and Deputy Poke Spees burst through the door. They had been at the Gein house but saw that no one was home. They knew Ed was frequently seen with the Hills and decided to see if they knew where he was.
Irene told them that Ed was taking Bobby to see what was going on. It was possible that they were still at the house. Sure enough, Ed and Bobby were sitting in the car out front.
They asked Ed to come and chat with them. He got into their police car and sat down smiling. Officer Chase asked him to tell them exactly everything he had done that day. He then asked him to tell him again, but this time he told a different story. When they called him out on it, he said,
Somebody framed me.
they asked what someone was framing him for, and he replied, Mrs. Warden. Chase leaned in and asked him to elaborate, to which Ed replied,
Well, she's dead, ain't she?
They asked him to explain how he knew she was dead, and Ed, still smiling, explained that he had heard people talking about it.
By then, any doubts that they had about Ed's involvement were gone, and they were convinced they had their man. Chase radioed to Sheriff Schley that they had the suspect in custody and drove off, leaving the hills behind with a bewildered look on their faces.
Little did they know that the next time that they'd see Ed, he would be considered one of America's most notorious maniacs. Not only that, they'd be thrust into the spotlight as the last people to have seen him before the truth about him was finally revealed.
And that is where we'll pick up next week with the conclusion of Ed Gein, the Plainfield Butcher.
And we'll be talking about the horrors that lay within the Gein house as well as Ed's fate.
Ooh, I'm excited.
This story, the more I think about it, is exactly why I love true crime.
It's one of the first, the first true crime stories that inspired so
Oh,
much.
yeah.
And just to think it was just little Ed Gein in Plainfield, Wisconsin.
We talk a lot about why we have this fascination with it, and to me, it's always been about just the depravity of the human mind.
Yeah, well, and for me, I think I mentioned this before too, is I had seen all the horror films
Mhm.
that had been inspired by the story of Ed Gein, never knowing that he was a real person. So when I learned that this monster existed in real life,
Yeah.
it immediately captured my attention.
Something that Harold Schechter says that I really thought was true was that every town has that house where
Mm-hmm.
people say the boogeyman lives.
Mm-hmm.
And this really was the prime example of that. And, it's surrounded by rumors, but they don't quite have anything to go off of. So are people being dramatic? Is it gossip? They don't know. This is the most extreme example of that. And next week, we're really going to dive into the reality of it because what I really want us to kind of talk about next week is, was Ed Gein evil? Was
Mm-hmm.
he sick? Or was he a combination of the 2?
Mhm. For me, going back to the horror movie thing,
Mhm.
it's the same reason why I'm fascinated with, like, Vlad Tepes, who
Mhm.
inspired Dracula, because, again, I learned about vampires and Dracula
Yeah.
well before I realized there's a real person behind the story,
Mhm.
and it sorta has made him this odd legend
Yeah.
in a way that isn't quite the same as your John Wayne Gacy or your Ted Bundy. I
Yes.
I feel like he's just different from them.
He's on a whole other playing field because, again, when you look at, John Wayne Gacy was very well liked by the community.
Yes.
Ted Bundy was very liked by the people who saw that side of him.
Mhm.
But then after everything kind of came out, they're like, okay, that makes sense. But even with Ed Gein at the very end, they're like, no, he couldn't have done
There
that.
is still people that don't think that he did it.
Yeah.
Wild. A friendly reminder that we will be planning our next series of episodes right away. So if you have a topic you'd like to see us cover, please email us at thegrimcurriculum@gmail.com. You can send us UFO stories that you'd like us to
Hmm.
cover, obviously the true crime ones, cryptids, of course, we love. Anything haunted or paranormal. What
Dark
else?
history,
Yes.
conspiracies.
Mhm.
We're
Anything
down.
like that.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
It is the time of the episode where we want to thank the folks on Patreon. You can subscribe for free and get early episode reveals, or you can sign up for one of the tiers. We have a Discord. We post video versions of all the episodes, and there is a free trial for that. But we want to thank our top tier, the Grim VIP.
So, a humongous thank you to the wonderful Yegpla, Mayhem Mudkip, Lisa, Nova, Kevinus Musicus, Brian, Bob, Paranoid Pop Rocks, Steven Centauri, Judy, and Atlantean Jedi. Thank you, thank
Thank
you.
you. Also,
Yes.
I got a little too eager.
Oh.
Our birthday's not on the 22nd, it's on the 26th.
Oh, that does sound right now
Doesn't
that
it?
you
I know. As
say
soon as
it.
I saw, I was like, oh, yeah.
And now that you say that, a quick reminder to everyone, we did have an extra credit episode released this week on Wednesday. So if you
Hmm.
haven't given that a listen or a watch already, please do so. You're missing out if you're not on extra credit as well.
Charlotte taught me bird facts.
Yeah, and I swore a lot.
It's so honestly, I love extra credit because, again, it's an unscripted show. We cover news stories, scientific facts, volcano updates.
Yeah,
We end it with a strange and unusual death, and overall, it's a lot of fun.
I think so. So yeah, go give it a listen. You're missing out if you're not.
Thank you so much for listening. This has been the
The
Grim
Grim
Curriculum.
Curriculum. I have a fun fact about Renaissance Venice that Augusta would really love.
Ooh.
Women were not allowed to stand in front of windows for any length of time because the men were concerned that standing in front of the windows would inflame the carnal desires of men walking below and then therefore take those men away from God. So women were just not allowed to stand in front of windows.
Don't let the men see you.
Augusta would have loved that.
She would have. She'd be like, damn right.
Rip Augusta, you would have loved Renaissance Italy. Bye.
Bye.
Apparently, women were also not allowed to play wind instruments, but you were allowed to play a stringed instrument. And it's because it said it made your face look unnatural.